Thank you, Councillor Whitney, for that great introduction. Political leader of the United National Congress, the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, fellow presenters tonight, members of the audience here and tuned in on the various social media platforms, my brothers and sisters all, good night. It is said that the only thing needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. You see, when you do nothing, you send a message to the evildoer that the damage that they are causing is acceptable, and that empowers them to do even more evil. And that is where we are today. For the past 6.5 years, our beloved country has been existing under a cloud of darkness, where everywhere you turn, people are suffering from unemployment and poverty, as the hacker told us earlier, from murders and rapes and robberies, as Sean just told us, from poor access to health care, to education and social support, as Marsha raised with us just now, from the worst roads and drainage infrastructure ever. We are losing local and foreign direct investment daily as businesses flee from Trinidad and Tobago. That dark cloud, ladies and gentlemen, that has blighted this country is this vindictive, corrupt regime led by Keith Rowley, Colm Imbert, Rohan Sinan, and Stuart Young, and this whole P&M government. And while they run in and out of cabinet, approving billions in expenditure for their friends, family, and financiers, we have children in this country who cannot afford to go to school because their parents cannot afford to buy shoes, cannot afford to pay for transport, cannot afford to buy food for them. So when Imbert boasts that the economy rebounded by $5 billion in 2 quarters during the same period last year that we are talking about, did you feel that? Did you see that? Do you think that the person struggling to make ends meet, to find food for their families, do you think they felt it? Do you think they felt any improvement in the quality of their lives? You see, ladies and gentlemen, you simply cannot trust this government to tell you the truth. Worse than that, they are digging out your eyes in front of you. And Trinis, instead of reacting, you're jamming still. Over the last 2 weeks, a minister of government boasted about spending $15 million of your money to earn $2.7 million. Boasting about throwing away more than $12 million of your hard-earned taxpayers' money so he and his friends could get a taste of carnival. Taste of carnival, why poor people, children, can't get a taste of food. And Trinis? Nothing. You're jamming still. $400 million thrown away by NGC, and the Prime Minister said nothing wrong with that. And Trinis, you're jamming still. As a country, we must do better. Enough is enough. More than 2 years ago, the head of the Office of Procurement Regulator warned this country that as much as $5.2 billion in state contracts is lost every single year in corruption and mismanagement because of the failure of this government to implement the procurement legislation. That legislation was passed way back in 2015 by a Kamala Prasad Bisesa administration. And up to today, this vindictive bad mind government would not implement it. Ask yourself why. Why would a government refuse to implement legislation designed to block corruption, to ensure value for money, to ensure proper accounting practice, to ensure on-time delivery and transparency in contracts? But let me put that into perspective. $5.2 billion over the last 6.5 years works out to $34 billion in corruption, wastage, and mismanagement under this P&M government to date. And yet they refuse to implement the law. Ask yourself why. So it is not that this government has no money, ladies and gentlemen. The money is there. They're spending it by the millions and the hundreds of millions. They're just not spending it on you. Tonight, I call on you, citizens, to demand that Colm Imbert implement the original procurement legislation now. Because if this implementation was done, if this legislation had been implemented a few years ago, this government would not have to be borrowing the kind of money they have been borrowing. They would not have to be selling off state assets left, right, and center. They would not have to be introducing tax after tax on citizens, and they would not have to be withdrawing billions from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. This Heritage and Stabilization Fund was created to provide an economic and a financial buffer during difficult circumstances. But within 1 year of coming into government, within 1 year of Imbert assuming office, he attacked the savings in the HSF, extracting $627 million between 2016 and 2017 to fund his government's quandarmania and to prop up the foreign exchange holdings. For him, this was free money. In 2020, to fund the election expenses, Imbert came to the parliament and changed the legislation to give him greater access to more money from the HSF. And then we saw the feeding frenzy of Colm Imbert at the HSF. In every one of the 7 consecutive quarters between March 2020 and September 2021, Imbert dipped his hands into the HSF and extracted millions of US dollars from our nation's savings. He saw no need then to rebuild the economy, to create an environment which would attract direct foreign investment or even motivate local investors into investing in business opportunities in this country. Imbert saw no need to deal with the absolute loss of confidence in the domestic economy that forced international credit rating agencies to downgrade the country. He saw no need to create new revenue streams, especially to generate the much-needed foreign exchange. You see, whenever he needed money, all he had to do was send a note. All he had to do was send a note to this compliant board of directors, whom he himself had appointed, and he had millions and hundreds of millions of your dollars to spend. And he did that over and over and over. According to his annual report for 2021, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund lost almost 30% of its value since 2020 because of the level of withdrawals by Colm Imbert. So what says Imbert? That's what the money is there for. But the Heritage and Stabilization Fund is an investment fund with money invested in a series of local and foreign products. It is not a bank with millions of money sitting in cash, sitting in a vault somewhere. So when Imbert writes his friend, the chairman, asking for another fix like a drug addict, instruments have to be accessed, investments have to be broken, and revenue disrupted, and there's a cost for doing that. But so what? So what if the country loses hundreds of millions of US dollars because Imbert hands sticky? Imbert does not care. All he cares about is the next fix. Since March 2020, Imbert has withdrawn $1.873 billion or $12 billion TT from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. If he had implemented the procurement legislation 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, if he had done that, he would have blocked corruption, mismanagement, and vice of upwards of $10 million. Upwards of $10 billion. That would have freed up enough money so that he didn't have to go to HSF to meet his obligations. Just saving that money would have been sufficient. But then, how would their friends, family, and financiers eat our food if not from the mouths of our citizens? You see, ladies and gentlemen, there is no motivation. There is no motivation to create solutions when all Imbert was required to do is pick the pockets of taxpayers. That is completely unacceptable. And on the way here today, I saw a newspaper article in which the governor of the central bank, the governor of the HSF was boasting that the HSF was edging towards 5.62 billion US dollars. It was edging up to $5.62 billion. Well, I don't know who he's trying to fool. Because in 2010, when Kamala Persad-Bissessar took over government, the HSF had 3.6 billion. When she left government in 2015, you know how much it had? 5.655 billion US dollars. And this man now talking about it edging up to $5.62 billion. Where he from? It was $5.655 billion when Colm Imbert got there. It's not edging up. It's been cut down. This raid on the HSF needs to stop. And it gets worse, ladies and gentlemen. Recently, the government announced its intention to pursue the compulsory raising of retirement age of citizens from 60 to 65. The Minister of Finance told this country that the NIB was not in crisis because it had enough money to last for 22 years before becoming exhausted at its present rate. But this is a major cause for concern because the last NIB report revealed that in 2021, the board needed to withdraw $1 billion from its investment instruments to meet the deficit between contributions and expenditure. So the NIB is cashing in its investments to pay bills, but to Colm Imbert, the fund is not in crisis. This compulsory raising of the retirement age means that now persons will have to stay in their jobs for 5 more years before they can access their full retirement benefits. To start with, this means that the promotion for existing employees will be drastically cut because persons will not be vacating their jobs. No promotions and no job opportunities. The government's logic is that some of the potential claimants will die between the age of 60 and 65, so they won't be alive to claim their benefits. They believe that people will contribute more to the same pool that they will access. That's their logic. But less people will draw down their retirement benefits because they have to continue to work, so the NIB will save that money rather than pay to beneficiaries. So the government's answer to building a greater national insurance fund from which to pay citizens benefits, citizens who contribute to it, is to deny them access to their funds. That making sense? Interestingly, the government also admitted that the inclusion of the informal sector into the NIB scheme would add little to that fund because it's mainly low-income workers. That means, ladies and gentlemen, that the next step the government is going to introduce is to raise the contribution rates. Once more, it is current employees and business owners that will be asked to again fund the increased contributions to this fund. So you are being asked, you have been denied the opportunity to retire at 60 and simultaneously being asked to pay even more as your cost of living rises. This makes no practical sense, but the government going ahead, they're rushing ahead with it. What has become painfully obvious is the continued intellectual laziness of the Minister of Finance. The number of employees contributing to the fund fell by 70,800 persons between 2015 and 2021. More than that, the number of employers also fell by 1,548. It takes no genius, ladies and gentlemen, to realize that the way to increase the value of contribution is not to penalize workers and employers, but to increase the number of workers in permanent, well-paid jobs, raising the number of employers as well contributing to the system. That is not rocket science. If you want more money into the system, create more employment, add to the base. That is common sense. But you see, common sense is not common to the PNM. It is similarly common sense that the government needs to do. What the government needs to do then is to create an environment for confidence in the economy so that investors will feel the need to come here and invest. We cannot leave the NIB alone, ladies and gentlemen, because citizens must have confidence that after they retire, after decades of employment, that their investments is there waiting for them so that they can continue to maintain their lives. They must have confidence that when they suffer an injury or loss, that their contributions that they have made over their lifetime will be available to meet their financial obligations. But the very actions of this Minister of Finance has brought the NIB into disrepute at a point in time when we need confidence in the NIB. You see, the law governing the NIB is very clear. The board of directors of the NIB is comprised of representatives of labor, business, and government. Importantly, the law says that the person who sits as chairman must be, and I quote, a person who, in the opinion of the minister, is independent of the government, business, and labor. This requirement was put in place to ensure balance on the board, but on January 24th this year, this Minister of Finance appointed businessman Patrick Ferreira as chairman of the NIB. Ferreira had served as a government representative on the very same NIB board since 2017 and up to days before his appointment. So how is it that he could be a businessman representing government on one day, and on the very next day, he is suddenly independent of both business and government? Who this minister fooling, ladies and gentlemen? This violates the law. It is my view that it violates the law. But instead of covering the breach when it existed, instead of treating with the issue when it was raised, the minister simply disregarded that. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we likely have an illegal chair sitting in the office of chairman of the NIB, making financial decisions with your money, decisions which could now be challenged in a court of law. Colin Burt has introduced chaos in the NIB at a time when we needed confidence in the NIB. This matter is now before the courts, thanks to a very public-spirited young man. But what the minister's conduct has done is to raise a red flag about his intentions as to what he wants to do with the National Insurance Board. This Minister of Finance, as I close, ladies and gentlemen, needs to stop playing Russian roulette with this $31 billion social security organization called the NIB. It is your taxpayers' money. He needs to keep his hands off of it. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I call on citizens to join us. Enough is enough. We cannot depend on the government to protect our interests. The United National Congress, led by our political leader, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, will continue to fight for you. We will continue to hold this government to account, ladies and gentlemen. Join us. I remind you that the only thing needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Join us, ladies and gentlemen. Enough is enough. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.